Today we are having a webinar for student finance, and thank you so much for registering for this event. This event is conducted by UApp, and for this event we have our expert Fred, who will be taking this webinar and delivering it to you. Moving ahead, I'll just give the opportunity to Fred to introduce himself and start off with the webinar.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Fred Bonful. I've been in the higher education sector, working for the private and also public universities for it's coming up to 15 years, actually, working in different departments, in admissions, also in student recruitment. And so I'm going to be sharing with you just some information about student finance. Just do bear in mind that everything that I'm going to be talking about today, it is available on the student finance website. So everything I'm going to be talking about is more summarized just to make it easier for you to be able to digest the information. So hopefully you'll be able to benefit a lot from this session. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go straight into just generally what we're going to be covering today. And so I appreciate that everybody on this call has got different backgrounds, different circumstances, and different interests when it comes to student finance. And so for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to be looking at just Student Finance England, talk a bit about that, how that works in terms of application, and when it comes to the different types of loans, whether that's the maintenance loans or whether that is the tuition fee loans, other types of bursaries that you might be able to be entitled to as well, and other types of funding. Obviously, repayments is important because Student Finance England, these are loans that students are taking out. And so with any loans that you take out, there are interest for the repayments. And so it's important to understand that as well, and other types of alternative funding. And also DSA, looking at disabled student allowance. So let's go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so with this here, it's just really just to find out a bit more about what you know about Student Finance England. And so the first one is quite obvious. You should know this one here. Do you need to be rich to go to university? And the answer to that is obviously no. And so it's false. You don't need to be rich to go to university. I mean, the UK has got a fantastic system when it comes to the Student Finance England. And so if you are eligible, which I'm going to talk a bit more about eligibility, whether that is you are a UK citizen or you've got a settled status or other recognized status, we'll also cover that as well. So everyone who is eligible, you don't need to be rich to go to university. So that's fantastic. Let's go to the next question, please. So universities charge £9,250 a year. That is true, right? So as it stands, there is no discussions at the moment whether that's going to be changing. But I know from just some of the other conversations I've had with my network of professionals in the sector, that could be set to change potentially in the future. But as it stands, it's still the same. Obviously, depending on the university you go to, some universities might be slightly lower compared to others as well. But generally speaking, most universities will charge you £9,250 a year for your course degree that you're going to be doing. Let's go to the next slide, please. So after graduating, repayments stop if your income is below 25,000 per year. So that is true. And so as you are aware, that the threshold at the moment is 25,000. So if you graduate from university and you get a job which is paying you below 25,000, you don't have to pay nothing back. So there's no repayments. And so that's important to know as well. So that gives you a good understanding of potentially how much you are going to be, the threshold will be. And so going to universities is clearly beneficial. Most graduates will be earning definitely above 25,000, depending on the sector you're going to be working in, of course. But generally speaking, student finance appreciate that most graduates will earn more than 25,000. But if you are working, and unfortunately, life happens to all of us, maybe you're not able to go to work again, or maybe you got made redundant and your income drops or you stop working, there'll be no repayments each month. So there's a very flexible system when it comes to repayments, which I think is fantastic. Let's go to the next slide, please. If you move to Australia or anywhere in the world, your student loan is written off. True or false? It's actually false. So unfortunately, there's nothing that is free in the UK. So when you do take out your loans, no matter where you travel to just bearing in mind in terms of repayments, it's done through the tax system. And so generally speaking, when you do make your application, you would have to obviously provide your personal details, also provide 2 references for individuals who would make student finance will be able to contact if they needed to get access to you. But generally speaking, no matter which country you go to, they'll just do it through the taxation system. So when you get paid, it will be automatically deducted. It's just a matter of informing student finance or informing your employer, rather, that you are moving or you're in a different country so that they can get that done in the right exchange rate as such. Let's go to the next slide. Just a few more questions, then we're going to get into it. Okay, so if you miss a student loan through repayment, a debt collector comes to your house. Let's have a look. That is false. It's not the same type of system as your bank loans. Obviously, for student finance, it's done through a system where it's very flexible and it's not connected to things like your credit score, which I think is one of the questions. So it's completely separate. So it's fantastic. If we go to the next slide for me. So tuition fees are paid directly to your university. So this one is true. So that is straightforward. So that's the money that you're not going to see. The tuition fee loans is paid directly to your university, and so student finance will make that payment to them, not through your bank account, which we'll talk a bit more about. The maintenance loan, which is paid directly to you. Next slide, please. I believe this will be the last one, or one more after this. So student loans will affect your credit score and ability to get your mortgage, and it's false. So it's not linked to your credit score or your credit history, which is fantastic again. So I do really appreciate student finance, how they've done the actual setup. And so if you are somebody who you're not sure whether that's going to affect your mortgage uptake, it's not going to affect it at all. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the last one. All your student debt will be written off 40 years after you graduate. Let's have a look. That is true. Yeah. So I don't want to add 40 years to my age now. I think I'll be quite old, but that is true. So it is 40 years will be written off. And so let's get straight into it now. So that was just really just to see what you know about student finance. So I think it's important that you do your own research just to find out a bit more about, especially the areas where you're not too sure about. So what is Student Finance England? And so just do bear in mind that when you actually apply for student finance, your letter, you will see Student Finance England written on your letter. So that's the organization that works for the loans company, the student loans company, which is owned by the government. But the Student Finance England is set up in that department, and they are the ones who distribute the finances or manage that process. So just do bear that in mind, because once you graduate, you'll notice that your letter would not say Student Finance England, it will actually say the loans company. So they're both actually the same company, but different umbrellas, if that makes sense. And so everyone who is in the UK, you are entitled to 2 types of loan. Obviously, when I say in the UK, it's very important depending on your eligibility status. So obviously, UK citizen, or you are on a settled status. So those 2 type of status obviously could be things like refugee status. It could be indefinite leave to remain. So obviously, depending on your status, normally would, in terms of eligibility, will give you eligibility for either your tuition fee loans as well as your maintenance loans. So different statuses might change as it goes along, but there's 2 types of loans that you can get. It's the tuition fee loans and your maintenance loans. And so we'll talk a bit more about those 2. If you do have any questions, please do pop it in a chat as I go along, because I know normally when I do these types of webinars, I get asked a lot of questions along the lines of eligibility or maintenance loan entitlement. And so let's go to the next slide. I'm going to spend some time just talking a bit more about the tuition fee loans. So the tuition fee loans, the most important thing just to take note of is that the tuition fee loans is paid directly to your university to cover your tuition fees, right? So it's very straightforward. Again, student finance will pay the exact amount for your course. So again, like I said, depending on the university you go to, some universities might be slightly lower, but just generally speaking, most universities, they'll charge you 9,250 £9,250 a year for your course. So if it's 3 years, obviously, or 4 years, depending if you start in foundation year. And so also important to note as well is that the amount does not depend on your household income. So no matter how much money you're earning in your household, whether you're working or not working, whatever your salary may be, they don't take that into consideration. And so the Student Finance England will give you the exact amount to cover your tuition fees. And that's important to note. It's not based on your household income. And so let's go to the next slide as well for me. Okay, so that covers the tuition fees. Again, straightforward, right? That everyone generally understands and appreciate what the tuition fee loans are for. Let's talk a bit about your maintenance loans. So your maintenance loans is for living cost. So things like paying your bills, paying your rent, and just helping you generally with travel costs to university. So anything associated to living cost whilst you're studying is the purpose of maintenance loans. It's important to also understand that maintenance loans will depend on your household income. So depending on where you live as well, that will take into consideration. So if you're deciding to study in London, which I'm sure most of you are on this call, you're looking to study in London. If you're not, maybe you're studying outside of London, maybe in Manchester or Birmingham. So depending on where you study as well, where you choose to live, that will depend on how much maintenance loan you will also get. But very important to note that it is based on your household income. So they will take into consideration how much money you're earning if you are working, and they will decide on that. See if you have children as well, that will play a part in how much money you'll be entitled to. So obviously different circumstances, everyone's household is different, everyone's setup is different as well, whether you're married or not married, you're living at home with a partner. So they'll take into consideration all your financial backgrounds before they decide how much you are going to be entitled to. I've heard some people say that, I can get this amount. I always say to students that each amount is different. So you're not guaranteed a certain amount. And so if anybody does say to you that you're going to get this amount without looking at your history, that's incorrect. And so student finance will take that into consideration. And lastly, it's important to note that the maintenance loan is paid directly into your bank account. It's paid in installments. So it's 3 installments. So for example, if you start your course in September, you get your first installment. And then February times, you get February or March, you get your second installment, and then coming towards the end of your academic year, maybe June times, you get your final installment. So it's paid via installments into your bank account. If we go to the next slide, just to summarize what we've discussed so far. Okay, if we can go to the next slide for me. Brilliant. So this is just a summary of what I've just spoken about so far. So again, if you look at the tuition fee loans, not to bore you, but it is based on, it's not based on your household income, whereas your maintenance loans is. Second part is it covers full cost of your tuition fees up to 4 years, and maintenance loan based on where students live and studies. I'll cover a bit more about that as well, so you can see how much student finance will be given you. And also, lastly, paid directly into your bank account. Oh, sorry, paid directly to the university, and maintenance loan is paid into your bank account in 3 installments. I'll just say this before we go to the next slide. I know I've mentioned there that the tuition fees covers cost of tuition, but just to let you, student finance clearly understands that, for example, to get something they call a grace period, where they'll fund you for extra year basically. And so in total it's 5 years you're entitled to funding. Again, the 5th year is just in case something happens. Life happens to all of us, so just do bear that in mind as well, that they will fund you up to 5 years. After 5 years they will not fund you no more. Okay, so in terms of the entitlement, this is just going into more details of the maintenance loan entitlement. I know, again, a lot of individuals throw out different numbers, but this is from the Student Finance website. So this is from a reliable source. And so just to make it easier for you, the top category is maximum. So that's the maximum you can get. That's students who qualify for benefits. Again, I appreciate that everybody has different circumstances from their household. And so, again, types of benefits could be maybe extra money that you're getting because of your low household income. Maybe it could be because of you've got kids as well. And so there's other different types of circumstances. So the first category you can see has the most in terms of awarding for financial maintenance loans. So you can see it has a lot more. So for example, most of us, if you are living in London, then you will see you get a lot more money. So if we look at the middle column, it's got here away from home in London. So essentially, that's the maximum you can get, right? The 14,000, just over the 14,000. And if you go below, maximum household income. So again, remember I mentioned before that it's based on your household income. So if your household income was, say, 25,000, then we're looking at the middle column, right? And so when you obviously, again, it depends if you're living in London or away from London. And so the middle column, you will see the middle column has got the most awarding for maintenance loans, because that's those who are living in London, right? And so if your maximum household income is 25,000, you notice that if you're living in London, it's 13,000. And so with that, again, it depends on your household income. And if we look at the last category, again, if your household income is up to 45,000 or more, you notice again, it's slightly lower. So student finance does take that into consideration, depending on obviously where you're going to be living as well. I did mention that those who are in London, so you notice the middle columns in London, so away from home in London, you see that that's a lot more. When it says away from home, that is if you're not going to be living at home, you're going to be renting an accommodation. In most cases, I don't think that will be the case for our audience who are on the call now, or for more mature students. Mature students generally will stay at home, not away from home. Obviously, younger students would generally travel to go and stay in an accommodation. And so if you are staying at home as a mature student, then you'll be looking at the middle column, right, which is in London. Elsewhere would be if you're studying, say, for example, in Manchester, maybe in Birmingham, or other areas outside of London, then you'd be entitled to the last column, which is away from home elsewhere. And so that kind of gives you an idea of the maintenance loan. The most important thing to bear in mind is just that it depends on your household income. So there is no guarantees. Student finance will review your application based on all the information that has been provided, and then they will decide how much award they'll give you. If you are working, when you submit your application, obviously that time you're working. But if you do stop working, do inform student finance, because obviously your household income can change at any point, and so that way they'll be able to award you with the right amount if you stop working, for example. Let's go to the next slide, please. I know I've mentioned quite a lot so far, but I think repayments is important. Repayments is something that, generally speaking, students don't pay much attention to. They generally just want to know how much they're entitled to. But it's important that you know that these are loans, and with loans, there are repayments attached to it, and obviously interest as well. And so, generally speaking, I'll do my best to explain to you in a simple form of how the repayments work. So, remember, I said earlier on that the threshold is 25,000. So at the moment, it's 25,000. That's if you're earning up to 25,000, your income. So student finance is saying nothing back, right? If your income is 25, what it generally works is, say for example, if we look at the box below. So say for example, if we look at 25,000 was your income, right? The monthly before tax would just be over 2,000. You pay nothing back. Reason being is because your threshold for your salary is 25,000, right? And then as you can see further down, the repayment starts. So just to make it easier for you in terms of maths. So if somebody, for example's wages was £28,000 a year, right? So what you would do is you would take 25,000, which is a threshold, from the 28,000. Right. So if you take 25,000 away from 28,000, you're going to be left with 3,000. So what you do then is you 9% of that 3,000. So that 9% is what student finance will use. So it's 9% of your salary deducting the threshold of 25,000, right? And so 9% of 3,000 in that example would be £270, right? So 9% of £3,270. And if you divide £270 for the 12 months, then you would get your £30 a month. So generally speaking, that's how you would work it out, right? 25,000, take away from your salary, 9% of what that is. And then you divide that into 12. That will give you an understanding of what you pay each month. So that's how you would work it out. Again, it's very flexible, it's very affordable. And so it's really a good system to help students I pay student finance myself for the degrees that I've undertaken, and it's very flexible, and so it's absorbable as well. So it's a good system that is in place. If we go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so I've covered the repayments in the context of obviously the threshold of 25,000, but there is interest that is added to your student finance. And so generally how it would work is obviously as the moment that students take out their student finance, the interest will start straight away. It's not after you graduate from university, it's during while you're studying. And so at the moment, the interest that student finance charge is 4%. That's how much they charge, right? But the repayment interest, how it works as well is obviously based on the RPI, retail price index, so the cost of goods, inflations, and things like that. And so at the moment, the RPI, I do believe, is 3% at the moment. And so student finance will charge you 4% interest plus RPI. And so it would be 4% from student finance. The RPI at the moment, I do believe it's 3%. So at the moment, it will take it up to about 7% altogether. So depending on what the RPI is, obviously the RPI changes all the time. So you can have a look and see what the current one, our RPI is. And then you just basically add 4% of that. And that would be your interest. So whilst you're studying, that's how the interest is calculated. 4% from Student Finance England, and then whatever the retail price index is, you add those two together, that's your interest whilst you're studying. When you graduate, then everything would be based on your salary. So that's the difference, right? Once you graduate, it's based on your salary. How much you earn will depend on how much interest you pay. Whereas whilst you're studying, it will be RPI plus student finance interest, what they're charging for that, which I believe at the moment is 7%. Yeah. So again, with the whole thing with the repayments, it kind of gets confusing a bit, but that's generally how it would work. And there are more information on the student finance website, so you can get your head around that as well when it comes to that. So again, that's just kind of explaining to you, it's 3% at the moment. But obviously with the current how things are at the moment in society, things can change, but it's just important to bear that in mind as well. And obviously, that's the last statement is very important. That interest charge does not affect your monthly repayments. So the monthly repayments will stay the same, irrespective of the interest that is charged. If we go to the next slide, just a few more. Okay, brilliant. So I've covered the two types of loans. You've got your maintenance loans. We've covered your tuition fee loans. So those are two types of loans, right? And obviously, with all those two loans, you've got to pay back those loans. And so there are other types of funding that is available as well, right? Those type of fundings, you do not get, you don't have to pay them back, for example. So that's the difference between the other types of funding. And depending on the university you go to, every university has its own bursaries that they give to students, grants or scholarships. Generally speaking, scholarships is obviously based on some kind of ability or maybe academic skill or maybe what you've achieved, academic background, or maybe you've done something outstanding in society that there's some form of award for it. Obviously, there's different scholarships across different universities available for international students as well to apply for it. And then you have bursaries. Bursary speaking is more like a hardship fund. Maybe your household income is 25,000 or lower. And so people who generally do not earn a lot of money will be more entitled to bursary, or maybe during studies, you might have hardship where you stop working. The university may have different types of funding available. Same thing goes with grants, charities, and things like that. But it's important just to do your research and check the university that you're going to go to, whether that is available. So obviously this is extra help that it can give you, but it's different across different universities that you go to. And so the different universities that I've worked at in the past, we've had scholarships and also bursaries available as well for students. And so that's very important to have a look at that as well. If we go to the next slide for me, then I'll talk a bit more about the other types of funding as well. So obviously disability is something that you are able to get help with. So disabled student allowance. And so it's not just physical disability, right? Because a lot of the times when people hear the word disability, they just think of physically disabled, but that's not what it's referring to. So you could be somebody who has got, learning difficulties. such as this, you're dyslexic or maybe dyspraxia rather, or other types of medical conditions. And so if you're somebody who has an illness that has been more than 12 months and is consistently shown that it's affecting you in terms of how you can perform, maybe that is academically or maybe how you do things, then you are entitled to the disabled students allowance. So that's important to understand the eligibility criteria. So it's not just, again, related to just physical disability. There's other ways of how you can also get help. Maybe it's mental health problems and other types of illness as well. So do bear that in mind. If we go to the next slide, I'll kind of go through with you and explain to you in terms of the types of help that you are able to get. So there are a substantial amount of money that is available to help students. Obviously, the purpose of this funding, you don't have to pay this back, by the way, as well. The purpose of this funding is to help students so that you can graduate. And so we're living in a country that is very liberal in that context of helping students. And so this kind of gives you an idea of what you can be entitled to. So you can get up to 26,000 and just over 26,000 every academic year. And so they're not going to just give you that money. How it would work is you would see a specialist, they'll do a needs and analysis just to find out a bit more about what will be suitable for you, what type of help will be needed for you. And then they'll do a review. And based on that, then they'll let you know. And so again, things like laptop, maybe you might need somebody to help you take notes during your lectures as well. Maybe pay for travel to get to university. That's something that is covered as well. So there are many different types of criteria for that, but it's worth mentioning because a lot of the time students are not aware of these other fundings that is available. They just think that it's just maintenance loan, but that is not the case. There's been cases of where students find out that they have some form of learning difficulties at the end of their studies. So don't wait until you finish your studies, then you find out, because a lot of the times it will affect your exam results or your coursework and things like that. So do bear in mind as well, if you are entitled to this funding, you get extra time for your exams. You get also extra days and weeks and months for your courseworks. So there are extra help that you can get from this as well. Once you start university, go to the department for Student Services Department. So the Student Services Department will be able to give you more information about this and also let you know how you can get yourself tested if you do have learning difficulties as well. Okay, so we are coming to an end. So just the last few slides. So thank you for just being patient as I conclude everything. So in terms of the application, so the easiest way to make your application is online. So the portals are open. I always encourage students as well, don't wait until you get an offer before you apply for student finance. I always say that because sometimes students might wait till the end and then apply for student finance. You can always amend your application at any time during student finance. So I think with that, you don't necessarily need to wait till the end. Obviously, for good practices, you might want to do that. You might want to make sure you get into the university first, get an unconditional offer, for example. Maybe after your unconditional offer, then you can apply for student finance. But just letting you know that it doesn't matter really. Even if you did apply before you got your unconditional offer, it's absolutely fine because they can always change your application or change the name of the university or amend your application. So it doesn't really matter. But obviously, the most important thing is to make an application as soon as possible. As you can appreciate that there's loads of students who apply for student finance. And so the sooner you apply for your finance, the better it will be, so that when you do start, everything will be in place and student finance are not asking you for extra paperwork. And so you can just go online. The easiest way is just go on Google, type in student finance, and they'll be able to provide you the link and you can go to it. You obviously got our admissions team here as well that will be able to help you with your application. We help all our students with applications as well. So if you have any questions with that, they can help you. If we go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but that kind of gives you an idea that the portal is obviously open from March, that it opened as well. So let's go straight to the next slide, and then I'll conclude with just the last few slides and we open up for questions. Okay, so the key points to remember. This one here is obviously if you are a parent or carer or guardian, and maybe you have got little ones, or you've got children who might be applying for student finance, that are they're thinking about going to university, you would need to support their application. And so that's just to bear that in mind, that they will need your personal details, such as your salary, pay slips and things like that, or the end of financial year, like P60, to send to student finance and things like that. And so that's just to bear that in mind, in terms of you may need to support your child's application if they want to go to university as well. Household incomes, obviously, like I mentioned, of your salary and things like that as well. And obviously, it's very important you get all the paperwork that's needed for student finance so you can get paid on time for that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Then we're going to open it up for any questions. These are useful links for UAP. So for everyone who is locked in now, obviously, when you are a student, you are entitled to many discounts and many different types of platforms to help you go through your studies smoothly. And so you are able to obviously save a lot of money, discounts, traveling, and other types of discounts for shopping. And so these are all the useful links to use. Obviously, UAP, you can get more information from the platform as well, or speak to the admissions team to help you in regards to that. But that's some useful links that you can use. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, and so we've finally reached the end. So thank you very much for your patience and just bear with me to going through that. So I'm going to open it up now for any questions at all that you might have.
Hi, I can ask a question if you don't mind.
Oh, hi, is that Mirella?
Yes.
Hi there.
Hi, Fred. What about international students?
Yeah, what about international students? As in, are they entitled to student finance?
Yes. They can get finance as well, or
yeah.
How is different between the home, UE, and international? What are the differences?
So obviously, if you are an international student, then you're not going to be entitled to student finance. So international students, you might be entitled to scholarships. Every university has got their own scholarships for international students. Also bursaries. Once you become a student, so you are an international student, but once you become a student at a university, then you can apply for the bursaries the university has available. But you will not be entitled to the Student Finance England. It's just set up for obviously UK citizens or people with settled status. You may have a pre-settled status, but it has its different conditions. I know from looking at the website, pre-settled status, for example, they may be only entitled to tuition fee loans, but not necessarily maintenance loans. And so depending on your circumstances, depends on what type of eligibility finance will be entitled to. And so I always encourage individuals just to make sure, check the student finance website. That's where I've got all the information from, where it's got a lot more details there. But just in a nutshell, international students do not get student finance support, but UK or settled status or pre-settled status do, or refugee status, or indefinite leave to remain, for example.
Okay, thank
you. Can I just add to that, please? So those who are international, classed as international students, they will be either on some kind of visa, right? And it will tell in there that no public funds, access to no public funds. So that is another key point to remember.
Okay? Yeah, you send me that. I noticed that now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Alina wanted to ask a question, but then Fred's screen kind of like that. And Fred, you still can hear us?
Yes, do you hear me?
We can hear you. I'm just concerned about Fred, if Fred can hear you.
Oh, yes. So I am asking
about,
I want to asking about what can be happen if the student so I want to asking about if the student study 2 years and after stop the study, what will be happen after some, for example, he can apply again for continue the studies, or it's not possible to take the same student finance.
So Fred, I think what Alina is trying to say in here is what happens to the students who has taken the student for finance for 2 years but did not continue?
Yes, the course, for example, is for 4 years, but he can work study 2 years. I'm sorry. So for some problem, stop and after can continue for some times or not.
The question Alina was trying to ask Fred was a student who has enrolled him or herself for a 4 years course, say after 2 years, for some reason couldn't continue the study. So that the student has taken the 2 years student finance already. Would that student be allowed to resume for another 4 years course and be paid for the whole 4 years or not?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the maximum that student finance will fund anyone who is eligible for student finance in England is 5 years. That's the maximum. And so it's important for students to understand this. So obviously, if the student, for example, took out student finance for 2 years, then they've got 3 years left. So the question would be, when they started, did they finish the years that they started, or is it a case of where they start and stop? So that, because obviously every time a student stops, the fees are still paid to the university. And so there's been cases where students will start the university, but don't go through the right format to inform the university. And what happens is that their tuition fees are still paid by the university. And so unbeknownst to the student, they think that I've stopped going to university, but they don't know the tuition fees are still getting paid. And so if the tuition fees have already been paid to the university, that will be considered as a year taken out of the 5 years. And so in summary, you get maximum 5 years, but if the student has used 2 years already, they will only have 3 years left. And so that's how it would work in terms of the funding.
But
and I guess the best way to find out is contacting the student finance, whoever is having that issue.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because student finance, when the student gives them a call, they will explain to you exactly how many years left, and also the discrepancies or the issues with the university fees and things like that.
Excuse me, Fred, but if they didn't receive any diploma for those 2 years, they can still apply for another 3?
Absolutely, that's fine. In some cases, student finance may say to the student that they may have to fund the first year. So, for example, they've done 2 years. They'll say then they need to fund themselves. So, in some cases, students would have to use maintenance loans, for example, to pay the first year, and then student finance will fund them. There you go. They'll fund them another 2 years. So this is why it's so important for students to understand that although they're entitled to 5 years, if it's 2 years taken already, student finance would expect them to fund the first year.
There is a question in the chat box, Fred, from Andrea Dimitrescu. I didn't really understand the question. See if you can help us. A student with personal independence claim awarded, is it entitled to DSA?
Yeah, so independence claim. So again, it's obviously different.
I'm sorry, may I interrupt you a second so I can clarify the question? Well, I have a student, she's in year 1. She was awarded personal independence payment by DUP. So I have helped her to apply for DCA as well, because they told me that she could get more money because of that. So she has personal independence payment with a disability, yeah. And then the student finance said that she could get more as a maintenance loan because of her disabilities. Am I right?
Yeah. So what I'll say, Andrea, is that obviously with the disabled student allowance is completely separate type of funding from the maintenance loans. So what I'll suggest is the student should speak to student finance to find out whether she's able to apply through the disabled student finance, the disabled students allowance side, because I don't think that she'll be entitled to more maintenance loans, as is completely 2 separate types of funding.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking it's the same as actually.
No.
I thought it's a top up for maintenance loan. Of course, if you say it's a different payment, yes. So they have said, they said actually that she could be awarded more money because of her disability.
Maybe
And I was
able to maybe try disabled student allowance.
sorry, say again.
I said maybe they can try applying directly through disabled student allowance.
Yeah, I understand. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea.
Hi, Fred. I have a question.
Hi, Isabella.
Hi, I've got one of the students. They got DSA, and they're asking if it's a payment or is it just equipment that they're entitled to?
So with DSA, what happens is that when the student applies and gives them the evidence and everything has gone through and they receive a letter to confirm of success application, they need to be reviewed. So with the review is a needs and analysis. So the university has to do this. I know normally it's like through a psychologist, doing kind of assessment. And based on the needs and analysis of the student, then they'll decide whether or not equipment is needed, travel costs to cover to go to university. So they shouldn't be able, they can't make a decision on what the student is entitled to unless they do the actual review. So the review has to be done first.
Okay. And the same student has PIP, personal independence payments, and because of they started uni, their universal credit as well, their own universal credit as well, it's been stopped.
Yes.
Is it right?
Yeah. So that's something to bear that in mind as marketing consultants or freelancers, that if your student is on benefits, once they start studying and earning maintenance loans, they will stop their university credit because of some of the conditions of the university credit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, Fred. I wanted to ask, so I do have a master degree from back in Romania. However, I did not ever apply for a student's, well, I did apply for a master, not a master, a doctoral loan with student finance, but I never took the loan because I didn't start my doctoral studies. In this case, is there any what my options are if I would like to apply not for doctoral studies, more like uni rather than master or PhD, please?
Yeah, so generally speaking, student finance always wants students to be studying higher qualification than lower. So for example, in your case, obviously you're saying that you completed your masters back in Romania. Yeah. And so normally student finance will say to you is that obviously someone like yourself on a master's level, you wouldn't be able to do an undergraduate level. They'll rather you do higher than a master's, right? And so, but watch this space, because I know that there's been discussions at the moment in the government where they're going to potentially allow students with masters to do another master's, and they'll fund that as well.
But is that fully funded, or is just the tuition fee?
No, so obviously with masters it's completely different in terms of the payments. Masters, they'll give you a lump sum of money. So for example, at the moment, I do believe it's just over 12,000 for the masters loans. They don't break it down to maintenance loan or tuition fee loans. They'll just give you a lump sum, 12,000 and over, and you will have to use some of that money for paying your tuition fees, and then use some of that money for your living cost. So they are expect to be working when you're doing your masters, because essentially the amount of money they give you is not a lot of money, obviously depending on the cost of your tuition fees.
Okay.
So for example, if they give you 12,000, tuition fees is 10,000, you might have 2,000 left.
Okay, thank you. I've been discussing with few student advisors, and they were saying that my only options here will be either to go for teaching or for nursing, and they will be like fully funded. Is will this be an option, or do you know anything about this, please?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one. I know that the UK in general speaking, obviously when it comes to the NHS, they're desperately in need of workers, and so to get people into that profession, and so they may have an option potentially for that. But I'll be honest with you, I can't speak on that because I'm not aware that they do fully fund.
I will answer that, Fred. There are some exception of courses where even though you have previous degree, will allow you to get student finance and maintenance loan. So DET, nursing, they are one of those courses.
What DET stands for, please?
Education and training.
Oh, okay. So just two options. Nursing.
Yeah, so when it comes to nursing, there are more than one courses. There is midwifery, there is child nurse, there's different courses available.
I've got
There's
another.
one more. Okay, sorry, go on. Who was it?
Hi, it's me, Isabella. Fred, if a student did a course in foundation year, but now they started now in September they want to start a new course with a foundation year, 4 years, were they able to do that?
Well, if they completed the foundation year, the natural progress is to then move to year one. So student finance will not fund another foundation year because the expectation is that you should always be progressing, not digressing. And so if they've completed the first year successfully, then they would expect them to then go to year one. And so they would not fund another foundation year.
There is a question in the chat box. It's from Sandy. If student finance is available other than settled preschool status, for example, maybe refugee status. I think it will be the same thing. It will mention in their, the status they are in, if they have access to the public fund or not. And the best way to make sure is to contact the student finance.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, indefinite leave to remain, refugee status. Generally speaking, those statuses will give you access. But again, like Ronnie said, it's best to just double check to see your entitlement.
Okay, so nothing else in chat box. Does anyone else has any questions? Okay, everyone is going to be quiet. That's a good thing. That means they got all the necessary informations, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. If no one has any other questions, we will finish this webinar soon. So Fred, thank you very much for your presentation and all this explanation around the student finance. I think it would be useful. It was useful for all of us who has attended the session. Really appreciate for making the effort to join the session. Can I just mention one thing though? I have noticed some of you couldn't join in on time. You just you made the effort to join the session. Would really appreciate it to be on time because it's your you're missing out useful information. But what we'll do, we will share this presentation among the team. Okay, if nothing else from anyone else, we will finish the session in here. Thank you once again. Thank you very much for joining in.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.